The next day, Daniel and I got ready. We packed our dressers, backpacks that the thing had given us, with a few sets of clothes, 2 notebooks with a lot of pens for the map, a bottle of water each, a box of saltines, and a wind-up flashlight. We weren't too worried about food, since what the thing brought us came from below anyway. Plus, when Andy had left, she had almost nothing and still survived a year. People seemed more called off, offering to help us pack and make us feel better about our decision, though I could tell they still disagreed. Grace approached me at one point and handed me a spare deck of cards.
I'm not sure if you'll ever get the chance, but I bet if you get to stop, it'll be as boring as it is up here.
I smiled at her. Thanks, Grace. I'll miss you.
I'll miss you too, honey.
Benjamin gave us a few batteries that he had stockpiled from old toys and remotes the thing had brought us.
Just in case you find a real flashlight down there,
he told me. As I packed, Ethan sat with me, keeping me company. We laughed and reminisced about the last 4 years. Despite living in the house being boring, we always found something interesting to talk about. Bear sat in the opposite corner of the room, pretending to read, but I could tell she was listening. I heard her chuckle alongside us occasionally. I was going to miss them. As the world grew dimmer and dimmer outside, the anxiety in my chest grew as well. I couldn't believe I was actually doing this. Images of the creature flashed in my brain. I was going to be down there with it. That thought alone was horrifying. Who knew what else lay beneath us? I had to remind myself that it wasn't for me. It was for the others, for Andy. Finally, nighttime hit, and we all gathered in the bedroom. We said our goodbyes to one another. Grace, Claire, and Benjamin. Frank nodded to us from the corner.
You better be safe,
Jan said with teary eyes.
and come back to us in one piece, alright?
Of course, I said with a smile. Admittedly, I was holding back tears as well.
Be safe, man,
Ethan said as he hugged me.
be back in no time,
I muttered. I released him to see Bear standing there waiting. She said nothing. I gently slid her arms around my waist and lay her head on my shoulder. I turned and kissed her head. I'll see you soon, Bear. With that, everyone shuffled into the bedroom, shut the door and locked it. I said a quick prayer that this wasn't our last time seeing them. Daniel and I then made our way to the kitchen door. We both placed hands on the pantry. Are you sure you want to do this, kid? There's no going back. I nodded. I have to. Are you? I was ready a long time ago. Together we silently slid the pantry to the side and swung open the door. The scent of mildew and age hit us as we slipped into the old empty yellow room. The air was cold and stale, carrying only the sound of my and Daniel's shallow breathing. The window on my right was caked with dust and moisture stains. Unseen beyond it was the sinister dark hills outside. The orange-egg carpet had been matted down with a perfect path from the past years of a routine I would no longer run. Now accompanied by a dark crimson stain that smeared the furthest wall opposite from me. Another door hung open, revealing the darkness beyond. No matter how many times I had to see that open doorway, the dread never went away. Together, Daniel and I started forward, making sure not to make a sound. We reached the doorway and clicked on the wind-up flashlight. We stepped onto the balcony in the room beyond and shone the light into the lounge below, making sure the thing wasn't there, waiting for us. When we felt the coast was clear, we turned to one another, made brief eye contact, then crept down the stairs into the darkness beneath us. The signal was erratic and frantic, and I could hear the knuckles of whoever it was accidentally hitting the door more intended as their hand shook. Benjamin stepped forward carefully and slowly opened the barrier. Daniel stood waiting in the hall, covered in sweat and clutching a laundry basket filled with various objects. He was alone.
What happened?
Jan asked from behind Ben. Her voice grew nervous.
Where's Matt?
The thing. He didn't make it.
Dan panted darkly. A collective silence fell over the room before Grace started to cry softly. We all took a minute before continuing. What did you guys... What happened? Daniel held up the laundry basket in his arms.
This was already waiting for us when we opened the door.
He set it down and people crowded around, sorting through its contents.
There's food in here.
Claire pointed out.
And books and clothes.
This was just sitting there.
Ben asked. Daniel nodded. Who left it for us? Do you think somebody is down there? Dan shook his head.
I don't think anything could survive with that thing.
Did you say it? Ethan asked.
Yes, I did.
He didn't push further.
Do you think that thing... could it have...
Bear asked, gesturing to the basket. A chill ran down my spine at the thought. If what she was implying was correct, then the creature downstairs had known we were hungry. It knew that we needed to eat soon, or we would die. Jan didn't care about the specifics of where the stuff came from. Food was food. She began unloading the basket and separating out the contents. Goldfish, fruit snacks, old granola bars, and a box of Capri Sun.
This is all of it?
She spoke. She popped open the box of the granola bars and turned to us.
There's only 12 in here. I know we're all hungry, but everybody just needs to take one. We have to make sure this lasts. The fruit snacks we can probably ration out longer. It's not much, but it's something.
She handed the box to me, and I began to go around passing out the bars to everyone. Larry snatched it from my hand and tore the wrapper off viciously, scarfing the bar down in nearly one bite. Everyone else weakly thanked me, then did the same. When I got to Daniel, however, he just shook his head.
I'd eat later. I'm not hungry right now.
Daniel, we haven't eaten in 2 weeks. You've got to eat something. He offered me a weak expression of reassurance. Don't worry, kid. I'll be alright. I just need a minute. I nodded. After we had all finished eating, Jan and Claire went to the kitchen and placed the remaining food in the cupboards, then returned to the basket to sort through the rest of the items. 2 books, a couple of blankets, a computer keyboard, a bottle of bleach, and a few other miscellaneous items. As the group took inventory and discussed the implications of the basket, I noticed that Andy was nowhere to be found. I peered out of the door to see her standing at the end of the hallway, facing the kitchen. I slowly stepped out and made my way to her. Hey, everything alright?
Oh, hi, Joel. Yeah, I'm okay. Just... poor Matt.
Yeah, I know. Everyone seems like they're trying not to focus on it.
They're just in shock. Give it time.
Yeah, I think you're right. I feel bad for Grace, though. They had gotten pretty close, I think.
I know. She's such a sweetheart, too. Mark looked like he was getting to know him as well.
At least he's got Jen. The two seem to like each other a lot.
Yeah, I noticed,
she said with a soft smile.
Isn't it funny? If we had bumped into each other outside of this place, we wouldn't have thought anything of it. Like ships passing in the night. But now that we're in this situation, I feel almost bad having lived like that. You're all such great people, and it's a shame we had to meet under the circumstances.
It is pretty strange. I'm glad of all the people to get stranded with in this place. I got trapped with people who are so kind. This could have been a whole nother story with a different cast.
I think Larry gives us a bit of a glimpse into reality,
Andy quietly joked. I laughed. He's just scared. I'm not sure anyone on Earth has ever been in a situation like this. Who knows how to deal with it?
You seem to be handling yourself well.
You do too.
She chuckled. Maybe on the outside. But on the inside, I'm freaking out.
I laughed. I was too. You could have fooled me. You're so confident and calm all of the time. It's honestly impressive.
Just get to know me a bit more. You'll start to see the holes in that statement.
Well, depending on how long we're here for, I'm sure I'll have time to.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think you're right.
After a beat of silence, she looked at me.
I'm glad you're here, Joel. Well, I'm not glad you're here, but I'm thankful. You, Bear, and Ethan have really helped me process the last couple of weeks.
Oh, thank you, I said nervously. I hadn't expected that. I'm happy to have you too. She flashed me a smile, and I felt my heart flutter for a moment. Are you kidding me? I remember thinking, now's not the time to start falling for someone. I guess I didn't stick to that way of thinking as well as I had hoped. I suppose it was something I had always been bad at. You should, come back to the room. I think they found an old Monopoly board in that basket.
Finally, something to do around here,
she joked as she joined my side. Together we headed back to join the others. The thing thrashed angrily against the door. Luckily, beneath the house was just as indestructible as above. I sat at an old decaying table in the dark room, sketching out the path we had taken so far to get here. I had almost forgotten how nice having furniture was. So far from the yellow room, we had headed down the first flight of steps, surrounded by the suffocating darkness. I thought back to what the nameless man had said about the basement that first day. He had been right. This place was strange, even by the house's standards. The rooms like they had been cut straight out of another structure and placed down here with no rhyme or reason. Some looked like vacant offices, others looked like old 70s basements, and a few looked like old boiler rooms, complete with rusty pipes and busted furnaces. We had been creeping through for about 15 minutes when we reached the second set of stairs. They looked to be a fire escape from some sort of skyscraper. Daniel looked at me in the dark as we prepared to go down. I had never even seen the last few rooms we had just walked through, but for him, this was the furthest he had ever been. Luckily, the creature was nowhere to be found. At least, not yet. Still, we were sure to tread lightly, especially from this point. From here forward, it was all new territory. We took our first steps down into the darkness, moving carefully and making sure only to use the flashlight when we needed to. We did so by only clicking it for a few seconds, gathering what information we needed, then clicking off and moving through the area in the dark. This was for two reasons. The first was because the flashlight was wind-up powered. Its battery wasn't the strongest, and if it ran out, we would have to rewind it. Winding the light was not a quiet task. The second was because while we couldn't see in the dark of the house, we knew whatever was down here could definitely see us. If we were shining the light down every corridor, anything in the dark would undoubtedly see us before we heard it. We stepped slowly down the cold steps, clinging to the railing as not to fall. Landing after landing, we descended, stopping to listen occasionally for the creature. As I focused on the sound of our footsteps against the stone, the realization of the entire situation suddenly hit me like a ton of bricks. I was below the house. I was in the place where the monsters lived. My chest began to feel like it had whenever I stepped outside of the sunroom. The feeling that I was in a space I wasn't supposed to be. These halls weren't safe. The creature was around here somewhere. Who knew what else might call this part of the house home? I felt my feet try to glue themselves in place, but I urged them onward. I had already made my choice to come down here. There was no turning back now. Every time they tried to stop again, I forced myself to think of Andy, alone here in the dark. After that, I couldn't possibly stop. After about 20 minutes of descending, we noticed a light at the bottom of the stairs growing closer. We reached the doorway that awaited us and very carefully peeked inside. It appeared to be a hotel lobby, It was large and vacant, with old pop art rotting on its walls, and damp, mouldy, patterned carpet beneath us. White fluorescent bulbs hummed with life, and yet the scene before us was completely dead. No sound, no movement. In front of us was a desk with papers scattered about, and behind it we could see a dark room that's door was ajar. Daniel and I looked at one another, both acknowledging the strangeness of the buzzing lights above us. Every room so far had been shrouded in darkness. Was someone here? We entered slowly into the room, checking down the long halls that branched off from it, making sure that nothing else was with us. After I scanned by the front desk, once again I noticed something by the dark doorway. Next to the opening, written in Sharpie on the wall, were the words, "Safe room." Psst, I gently called to Daniel. He looked over and I nodded to the writing, then made a confused expression. He made his way over to me. Then together we moved closer to the desk. We didn't dare step behind it or get close to the door. After all, we knew it could be some sort of trap. However, upon closer inspection, the handwriting looked neat, clean, intentional. When I imagined what the creature's script would look like, those were the last things that came to mind. I lifted the flashlight in my hand, extending my arms over the desk and clicked it on. Light flooded the room ahead, and within was what looked like an office. More desks, papers, a rack of key cards, and a printer. Another door within led to what looked like a break room. Nothing living inside as far as we could see. I held my hand to Daniel and stepped around the desk. I peered into the room, then made my way further inside to the next. The break room was empty as well, save for some vending machines, chairs, and tables. As I headed back out of the space, I saw the door locked from the inside, and it suddenly clicked. Safe room. As I stepped out of the doorway to signal Daniel, I felt my footstep on something that gave slight resistance before going slack. I looked down in an instant and traced the source. A phone cord that had been buried by discarded papers running up to a phone on the desk. My heart sunk as I watched the black plastic phone get yanked off the surface and clatter the ground with a loud snap. The sound echoed through the halls. Daniel and I looked at each other and waited. Silence. Nothing but the ringing in our ears and the sound of our heartbeats. Dan shot me a look of daggers, and I mouthed the word, "Sorry." Just then I caught something to my left, movement down one of the corridors. I snapped my head in the direction, and my heart nearly leapt from my throat. The creature's head was looking around the corner, its horrific eyes peering at me from behind its sinister mask. Before I even had time to warn Daniel, the thing squealed like a banshee and began to charge down the hall, banging on the xylophone beneath its skin. I knew the thing was fast, but I had never seen it actually run before. It crawled on all fours, putting its arms far out in front of itself and then yanking its bottom half forward. Somehow, even moving like this, it moved at an alarming rate.
Come on!
I yelled, gesturing to the room. Daniel wasted no time by walking. He leaped straight over the desk and dashed inside. I whipped around and slammed the door shut, jamming the lock into place. Not even a second later, I heard the thing collide with the door. We both panted before Daniel chuckled to himself.
I guess things never change, huh?
I finished drawing the break room and closed the notebook. I slipped it back into the bag. By this point, the creature had finally given up and crawled off somewhere down the halls. We decided that it would be best to stay the night in the room. Andy must have marked this place on her way through, I said. I wonder if she's done that with more rooms.
She probably did. She was always looking out for us. Probably did it in case she...
Dan hesitated.
In case she didn't make it back.
That way, we would all have a chance if we ever followed. Yeah, I replied. A tiny smile creeped over my face. That sounds like her. When we woke up next, we carefully peered out the door and listened very carefully for about 5 minutes. When we confirmed that the thing downstairs wasn't in the area, we slipped out and continued onward. Admittedly, it wasn't too hard to find our way. On the floor, Andy had left a trail of blood from wherever she had been injured, all the way back up to the house. Daniel followed the crimson path and led, but I couldn't bear to look down at it. Every time I did, all I could imagine was her, injured and scared, staggering her way back up to the room. I couldn't even believe she had made it up the last 2 flights of stairs with how bad she had been bleeding. I kicked myself hard the further and further we got along the trail. I should have been with her, I thought. We continued this method until Dan stopped in his tracks right in front of a doorway. I stopped as well and looked at him. He turned to me and then pointed down to the blood trail. I hesitated but forced myself to look, and when I did, I was confused by what I saw. Right where the 2 rooms connected, cut off at the carpet seam, the blood stopped. There wasn't a trace beyond the doorway. It was as if someone had seen the stain and replaced the carpet. Dan looked at me, and I looked at him, and then he shrugged and continued. Onward, we couldn't do much, and trying to understand it would just leave us standing there. From here on out, we were flying blind. We could discuss later. The second basement was much larger than the first. The rooms had kept their constant pattern of randomness. However, a few were lit with fluorescent lights on this floor. We had been walking for about an hour before we found another staircase down, although we no longer had a guide. So we made some wrong turns along the way. I had to occasionally sketch the map while we walked, to not forget our path before I could record again. We prepared at the top of the steps, then made our way through the same way we had with the last. However, when we clicked the flashlight on at the bottom, we saw more writing beside the doorway, this time in green spray paint. Fear struck me as I read the phrase. Danger ahead. Daniel and I didn't move. I could tell that neither of us wanted to push forward. We had lived in the house for 4 years and thought we had learned all of the ins and outs of its rules. It was truly setting in how little we actually knew. I looked at Daniel and held out my hand. He looked at it, looked at me, then shook it. It was a silent acknowledgement. We both accepted whatever lay ahead. Together, we stepped through the door. The hallways we walked through were dark. They looked like they used to belong to an old school, with rusty lockers flanking either side of us and water dripping from the old ceiling panels. Doors to the classrooms were open to our left and right, and more corridors and halls went off in several directions. We decided to continue down the main corridor for now. It was the safest bet. As we approached its end, it turned off to the right, where a dim light was emanating. We thought it must have just been another lit room until we heard a slight noise echoed down the bend. Alongside the faint sound of music playing was an odd sound, and it took my brain a second to register it. It was wet and squishy, with seemingly no rhythm and lasting only a few seconds at a time. Daniel and I were immediately set on alert. We knew any sound at all was not good. We crept into the edge of the corridor and peeked around the corner, using the side of the lockers for cover. It may not have been the wisest decision. Still, admittedly, I think it was morbid curiosity that got the better of us. We didn't know what else could be below the house, and we wanted to know what we were up against. The room at the end of the hall looked like a dance studio. It was large and open, and the wall that we could see was covered in cracked and dirty mirrors. Mirrors that reflected the horror within the room. We could see figures moving about, 3 of them. For a moment they looked like people dancing in costumes, but as my eyes adjusted to the light, they began to take in more detail. The people were not wearing costumes. They were ballerinas, their hair tied up in tattered buns, wearing swan masks. Their arms had been twisted and mutated, jutting in several directions like a bird's wings. A sprawl of rotten feathers even sprouted and fanned outward from underneath the limbs. At the end of the wings, a single long black curved claw hooked outward, glinting in the ghostly blue light that the room provided. Their legs were long and slender and looked human. However, in place of feet, the limbs stretched into another black talon that spiked straight down into the ground, forcing the women to balance carefully. Their skin was pale, yet seemed to sparkle beneath the glow, and despite their mutilated features, their frames looked human and normal as they moved. However, any illusion of humanity vanished. The swans jerked around violently, yet still moved about with the grace of a dancer. They thrashed horribly out of sync with the music that was filling the hall. The tune was faded and distorted like a broken record. They spun and twirled around one another, stopping for their limbs to occasionally spasm before continuing. They were clearly dancing some sort of twisted ballet. Their movements were fluid on their knife-like feet, and I found myself strangely fascinated by them. That fascination was interrupted as one of the ballerinas twirled towards another, thrusting out its arm, and revealed the source of the sound we had been hearing. The black claw of the woman slid effortlessly into another ballerina's torso, piercing her silver leotard. The impaled swan winced at the attack but made no audible sound. In one quick motion, the first woman wrenched her arm upward hard, sending blood flying and completely gutting the second dancer. That was all Daniel and I needed to see. We ducked back around the corner and looked at each other. I stared at him with a "Did you just see that?" face, and he glared back with a "Are you kidding?"
it's always something expression. Despite both our reactions, it now was clear that we would not be going down that hallway. I went to move back into the corridor, but Daniel stopped me. He shook his head. "Do you see that door?" he whispered. "What door?" "The door behind them." I glanced back around the corner and suddenly saw what he meant. There was a doorway behind them, and unfortunately a sign to go with it. Stairs. I turned back to Dan and gritted my teeth. "What's the plan?" "I'm not sure. Maybe there's another staircase." There could be. But so far there's only been one per floor. We walked nearly all of the second floor and we never found another set of stairs. "You're right," Daniel muttered, biting his cheek. "Maybe we can sneak by them." I gave him a nervous look, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it was most likely our only option. It was just a matter of how. There was no way we could sneak through the room. That was certain. I turned around and glanced at the lockers. Silently, I stood and placed my hand on one of the latches, then lifted. Locked. I tried the next one. Same thing. I tried one more. Click. I slowly swung the locker open, being sure not to let the hinge creak. Then I looked inside. It was certainly big enough for a person to fit in. Maybe we can make noise down the hall. They'll probably go check it out. If we hide in these, they'll go right past us. What if they check him? Well, then I think we just saw what will happen. We thought for a moment. Finally, Dan stood and made his way over to the other side of the hallway. He too began trying lockers. I took that as an agreement to the plan. I looked back in my locker and saw an old wet textbook lying on the bottom. Perfect. I took it and held it up to Dan. He finally found an unlocked locker. I pretended to throw the book down the hall, asking for his opinion. He nodded, then climbed quietly into the vault and shut the door. My heart pounded with anticipation. If this didn't work, we were now trapped with murderous harpies that knew we were here. I cut my thoughts short, not allowing them to stop me. I raised the textbook above my head and then threw it down as hard as I could. A thunderous boom echoed down the halls, and I quickly kicked the book, sending it sailing down the corridor and into the dark. I spun around, stepped into the locker, and shut the door. No more than a few seconds later, I saw a shimmer appear in the corner of the locker slats. They were passing by. More than we had initially seen. The first one that passed looked different than the others. It had the same features, but it wore a black leotard instead of silver. It danced much faster, as if eager to find the sound. I saw even more enter from the doorway of the classroom and the other hallways. I was glad we hadn't chose to hide there. Their movements were haunting in the silence, and I held my breath so they wouldn't hear me. Their feet touched the ground without making a sound, and I couldn't hear them breathing at all. As they passed by, I watched one ballerina bump into another. Immediately, several other swans turned to the woman and began attacking her, slicing through her skin like a hot knife through butter. She fell in a mangled heap in the middle of the hall, right in front of my locker. I watched as the rest continued on their horrific dance, some stabbing into the collapsed dancer with their needle toes. I knew they were monsters, but I still, for some reason, felt sorry for the fallen ones. I peered down the hallway the best I could through the vent in the locker. I watched as the back of the line stopped for a moment, and then the girls began to fan out. In groups they danced and leaped through the halls, heading down the other corridors of the floor. They were looking for us. I waited until I no longer saw anything, then chanced to open my locker. I peeped through the crack into the door and looked down the hall. No sign of them. Daniel saw me open my door and climbed out of his locker. We crouched low and hastily began heading for the dance studio. As we did, I looked down at the lacerated ballerinas on the ground. The cuts and slits looked all too familiar. I wondered if this was where Andy had. We stepped cautiously into the room. A single blue light bulb hung from the ceiling in the corner of the room. A record machine spun a far too worn record. The gutted ballerina lay lifeless in the center of the room, her entrails exposed. I wondered how there were so many if they killed each other so often. The singer's voice was distorted and muffled. On either side of the studio, some more hallways went off into the darkness. It seemed all roads led back to this room. There were doors on all entrances, but it would have been pointless to try and shut them. Their locks needed a key to be turned. Daniel rushed over to the door to the stairs and tried the handle. No.
What is it?
I whispered. The door is locked.
What?
I cried in shock.
How?
I don't know. It just is. I felt my body tense as I balled my hand into tight fists. There had to be a way through. Our journey was not going to end this soon, especially since we just set a search party on the entire area. It was this way or no way at all. Joel, come on. We can't just stand there. There has to be a way through. You know the rules of this house as much as I do. If a door is locked, it stays locked. I had nothing to say. I knew he was right. Let's just find a safe place and think this out. Yeah, I said defeatedly. Yeah, all right. Just then, I saw something moving in the reflection of the mirror behind Daniel. I watched as the ballerina on the floor began to twitch. Slowly, its arms moved outward as it began to prop itself back up. Dan, I see it. Run!
Hello everyone, Grim here. And you made it to the end of another amazingly terrifying tale. This one was part 4 to the Somewhere Beneath Us series, written by the amazingly talented author, Ink Wielder. I hope you enjoyed my re-envisioning of this. There is going to be a couple of cool, exciting bits that come out. For example, I'm thinking of getting some of my friends in the horror community to come and help us out with a redoing of the script. That's something you may see coming in the foreseeable future. But anyway, look, this time I'm actually not going to keep you guys here for very long. Just remember, if you liked what you watched today, please like and subscribe. If you want other people or know other people that might be interested in this sort of stuff, share my content to your friends, get it out there. All that sort of stuff really helps me out. It helps the channel grow. I mean, we've made it to an amazing amount. We're at 1,700 subscribers right now,
1,715, I think I just saw. Also, if you are someone who wants to be able to get my information once it comes out rather than waiting a while, because unfortunately it doesn't seem like YouTube is really promoting me, then you can join my Facebook profile. I've got a account set up there with a couple hundred subscribers that just follow along. But yeah, that stuff and all the details for that you can find in the description and attached to the link tree in my profile. Okay, yep, no, I dragged this out. At least this time it was professionally. Have yourself a wonderful night or day, wherever you are. Make sure that you are safe and happy. And as always, I am Grim, and I'm, well, signing off.